Ex-prisoners of Reddit, what was the worst thing you saw inside the prison walls? I worked in the medical department of a large prison in Florida. We had an inmate bite a bigger inmate's nose off. The tip. The bigger guy kept asking the kid for sex and the kid had enough. We saw several stabbings. Several were life-flighted out. But those weren't the most interesting. We had an inmate smoke some bad spice. Made out of God knows what. He came to medical out of his mind and later died because it caused brain hemorrhaging. One guy got a dislocated patella and was just sitting patiently as I got his info. I asked if it hurt and he said yeah. I asked how he was so chill and he replied, because I'm not a bitch. Oh yeah. I forgot the guy that got a stick of deodorant stuck up his ass so far we had to send him out to have it surgically removed. He said he was practicing for sneaking in a cell phone, but there's a 50% chance he was using it as a dildo. Inmates were very creative with their homemade dildos. There was talk about a guy assaulting his own daughter. Some guys made him a cup of morning coffee. Morning coffee is basically taking a kettle, pour cooking oil in it, heat it up, and add a lot of sugar, and then throw it in someone's face. It was very uncomfortable to see and hear. Edit. Whoa. First comment to really blow up like this. I've noticed from these comments that when people do what you described they add large amounts of sugar. Why is that? Is it because the concoction becomes like syrup and hard to remove? Yep. Makes the boiling oil stick and burn into the skin. Almost like Molotov, benzene mixed with styrofoam, or something like that. Not prison but jail. 6 months pregnant and her water broke. Coast didn't believe her and waited to take her to the hospital until she was hemorrhaging. The baby died and the woman was released because they didn't want to pay medical costs. This was 2004-ish. Done 11 years myself. One of the worst things I've seen is 2 members of a gang called Goodfellas, aka 40 deep, jumped on a blood on the way back from bill call. One used a large knife. The other had a fan motor in a net bag and used that as a flail. Also seen/heard multiple people being raped. A friend of mine admitted to me after a year or so that he had been actively raped every night by his roommate, a OOOG from the Bloods, for about a 5-month period. There's more just what I could think of ATM. OOOG from the Bloods. What's an OOOG? A triple OG means he was one of the founders of the gang or at least there in the beginning. I've never been to prison, but my cousin did, and he came back out all sorts of messed up. He was arrested for drugs. According to him, he spent the majority of his time in solitary confinement. For his safety, he said that his first couple of months there were okay, as far as prison goes. But that one day, for whatever reason some guy who had been kept separate from the general population was accidentally put with the rest of the prisoners, unsupervised, and that a few prisoners grabbed the guy and that they stomped on his elbows and legs to break them before they sodomized him with some shivs. My cousin said that those guys did it all in an instant and that they threatened him if he snitched. My cousin was later interviewed by some of the guards before they took the guys who did this, and so some thought that he had snitched. He says that he didn't, but that didn't matter because the guards had put him in solitary for safety and was eventually kept there for months longer because he wouldn't snitch, so they tried to accuse him of being an accomplice. I spent 8 years in prison. In the state of Georgia, there was a guy who made a hustle of hiding illegal cell phones for the Mexican gangs. When a shakedown/search occurred, this man was responsible for the loss of many of those cell phones. He was confronted on the yard and tried to escape by climbing the fence. He got stuck in the razor wire, shredding his forearms, while 7 or 8 Mexican gang members were stabbing him all in the back of his legs and his ass. That's the gang mentality that I find to be the most bullshit. You tell this guy to hold on to these phones for 6 or whatever. He agrees. You then proceed to give him way more contraband than he could possibly hide. It gets found. He's probably getting time in the hole. The Mexicans get off scot-free, but they still want revenge on the guy. Mob mentality is the worst thing about any group, and that's a fact. I spent 2 weeks awaiting trial in Johannesburg Central Prison. Saw a guy with mental issues get severely beaten one night after he attacked another inmate. Saw another guy have a kettle of boiling water poured over him another evening after an argument with another prisoner. In both cases the wardens did nothing until the following morning. I was lucky. I managed to avoid any issues while I was there. Overall a crappy experience. 0 tenths. Would not recommend. Seeing someone on the threes jump to his death. Just missing PPL on the deck. Saw a guy try to kill himself. The block only had 2 tiers. He walked up the stairs and the phones were right at the top. He grabbed the hook and used it to climb on top of the phone with the side railing. He then leaned over the rail holding the hook and fell back. He just broke his back and did the rest of his bid/life in a wheelchair. Life with an extra dose of duck. That's wild. I spent 6 years in prison. 1 month in I watched a Crip on Crip gang stabbing. They stabbed the guy 60+ times while he was curled up in a ball screaming help. But nobody could because he'd be a target next. He somehow survived, but I couldn't tell you how. I think about it every day. Random question. In movies/TV, they often depict people in a situation where they are forced to take sides, join a gang, or forced to participate in other crimes. How accurate is this? Suppose I went to prison, but I wanted to mind my own business, like stay in my cell, read books, talk to my cellmate, eat my food, etc. Stay out of gang stuff, don't pick sides, etc. How easy is it to just mind your own business? My uncle was in for 17 years for marijuana related charges. He was in a wood with 2 other guys with the same name as him, both of them in for 7 years. One of them killed a guy and the other was a child molester. One day when my uncle was in the showers, a group of guys who mistaken him as a child molester were about to serve prison justice on the wrong guy. He quickly realized the situation, sprinted naked out the showers to grab his papers to show the guys they have the wrong dude. 17 years for marijuana and 7 years for molesting a child. That's stuck up. Not the most messed up, but this stuck with me for whatever reason. While studying medicine, I was working at a prison clinic in New York. Guy comes in with a fairly dirty cast on his arm. Otherwise he seems fairly normal. Has there to have his cast removed. So I ask him when they put the cast on. Hez says December. It's late January. So yeah, it's been enough time for the bone to heal. I figured his living conditions were the reason for the cast looking like that. So I got the okay and started removing the cast. The smell. His skin underneath looked terrible. And there were little pieces of wood and other crap embedded in the skin. Complete atrophy of the casted forearm. After further questioning, it turns out the cast had been on his arm for over a year. And it was just getting removed. I was glad to be getting out of that rotation. Saw someone break a small branch off a tree in the yard, dry it out in the sun, sharpen it down to a point on the concrete, and then stab a guy in the back with it 4 times. He had to be airlifted to hospital because it punctured his lung. Modern problems require Stone Age solutions. Modern solutions create Stone Age problems. I did a year spread out over a few 2 yards in as low-level yards. I didn't see much that really shocked me. I'd been on the street prior to being locked up, so anything I saw happen in prison was more of the same really. There were fights and people catching heat from their own people for ducking up and breaking rules. But for the most part it was fairly tame. I think the part that sticks with me the most is the amount of very clearly mentally ill people who were locked up with me, but were getting no help whatsoever. I mean, none of us were really getting any help. But some of these guys were clearly going to have no option when they left except to go back to what they were doing. To me, that was the worst thing I saw. The absolute apathy of the system as a whole. I was incarcerated with 1,200 other inmates on 1 yard in Tucson, in a complex that had I believe 7 or 8 other yards on it. This is of course one of many complexes in, as this also came as a shock to me when I really thought about it. Just the incredible amount of people being locked up. Most of the people I did time with were in for non-violent, drug-related offenses. The US has the largest prison population on the planet because it's a capitalistic, for-profit system. The people running the prisons have zero interest in rehabilitation. They want people to come back because prisoners are their profits. Mentally ill, homeless, impoverished, minority populations are extremely easy targets for the American prison system to exploit and use as slave labor while being paid by the state to keep them locked up. America is so unbelievably broken once you look behind the patriotic propaganda screaming at you to blindly love your country. It is sickening. English female prison. I saw a woman get held down by two others while a third woman proceeded to shove her hand up the woman's vagina to check if she had came in with a parcel. Drugs. This was in the communal showers, so yeah, addicts don't give a duck. Sounds horrifically painful. The complex trauma would never leave. Did they have any reason to think she had drugs? Likely try to check every new person. Please click subscribe if you enjoyed this video.